Okay, so my name is Philip Martin, and I am the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery here in Los Angeles. Um, this is our first conversation of the fall, which is really exciting, and we're doing it on the occasion of Rema Ghuloum's fantastic current show at the gallery, Atmospheres, which is on view through late October. If you have any questions about the webinar or the works that you see or anything, just send me an email or let me know. I'm really delighted too that in this conversation, Rima and is joined by Daniel Dove. They know each other personally. Daniel and Rima both show at the gallery. So I'm looking forward to a fun conversation on the work today. Rima, Daniel, how are you guys doing today?
Doing
I'm
well.
good. Yeah,
Awesome.
thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much for doing this with us. I'm really excited to learn more and to hear your all's thoughts. So let's get going.
Thanks so much for inviting me to join this conversation, Philip. And thank you, Rima, for making the paintings um, that are so worth conversing about. I told Philip at the opening of the show that I had the rare experience as a painter of feeling jealous looking at your show, wishing that I was the kind of painter who could make these, and then also secretly wishing that I'd made them before you did. Uh, so I could get I could have all the glory of them. But of course, I'm very different and yet very inspired by what you've made. And so I just want to jump right into some of the things that I think about, and also some of the things that I feel like occur in conversations between painters about your work. The paintings are obviously very atmospheric, very kind of vaporous. Um, but there are also these structural aspects in them. There seem to be a kind of emergent line work or linear structure inside these vaporous clouds. Can you talk a little bit about like how those come about?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, also for doing this. It's an honor to talk to you. And yeah, I mean, my paintings, I think I'm always kind of like tethering between like chaos and order in terms of, or just um, in terms of my process. So there's, you know, they start very fluid and on the floor. Um, so I'm pouring with a kind of a variety of different kinds of methods of pouring, like I'm using squeeze bottles and buckets and spray bottles, and I'm really trying to, and I'm using acrylic wash, and it's very, it's an aqueous medium, and I'm applying the paint kind of like a watercolor, so it's very fluid, and I'm really using my body to kind of move the canvases around on the floor. They're propped on blocks, but I'm kind of manipulating the way the paint will move. And that's sort of the chaotic kind of stage of the painting. And then, I usually work in stages where I work on a lot of paintings at once in that stage, partially because it's very messy. So there's just paint all over the floor, and I have tarps down, and so I have to kind of work in stages. And then when that process is done, and I'm satisfied with the way the paint has settled over a course of maybe a couple weeks, I prop the paintings on the wall. And at that stage, I kind of look at the pores as sort of like the structure of the painting. So I'm working uh, with kind of the linear elements that are achieved in the pores, or kind of where it settles. Maybe that's a starting point. And then I build up with really, really thin layers of oil paint. And I hand sand in between each layer. And the kind of painting evolves through this kind of play between building up the surface really slowly and then erasing it or subtracting it with a hand sand. So it removes just part of the layer. And I think the structure comes through, and that way they kind of form like a crystal, or they're geological. And the structure kind of comes through. I kind of I kind of build the painting based on sort of, I let the kind of linear elements in the painting that exist already from the pours and from the sanding kind of lead me and direct me, and then I kind of go from there. So that's where the structure kind of develops.
It's interesting that you use that term geological, because one of the questions I had was that are these paintings, and particularly the relationship between the structural aspect and the sort of vaporous or cloud aspect, maybe color field aspect, do you think of those that as being either representational or metaphorical? Um, and for me, these really evoke like the conditions of weather, very different conditions in different paintings, but they're also feeling of like something like scaffolding, almost like something architectural, almost lost in the fog, like a late Monet Rouen Cathedral painting. And then sometimes they feel very bodily, like almost like there's a spine in the painting and there's like a rib cage or the sweep of the artist's hands sort of moving out to the edges. What do you think about that? There being metaphorical or representational aspects to these paintings.
I mean, I don't, I, I mean, I think I have I'm like a technically trained observational painter. And I think like, you know, I've spent a lot of time looking and thinking about light and shadow and form. And though I'm not referencing anything specifically, I don't make preliminary drawings. I think it's all, I've synthesized a lot of that. And so it's all in the painting. And when I'm making paintings, I'm thinking more about sensations and how to achieve kind of like these contrasts within a painting, like dull versus soft, or dull versus sharp, soft versus hard, um, hot versus cold, like that kind of thing. And it's not like it's very conscious. It's sort of like playing with texture and surface and light and shadow. So it's not that I don't think that they can be metaphorical or observation or representational. I just don't think about them in that way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, and I think that there's a sort of categorical difference, it seems, from the linear structures in the middle of the painting versus the edge of the painting, where there's a line of a very different kind of mark that builds up. Can you talk about the function of the edge of the painting in relationship to the center of the picture?
Yeah, I think the framing in the painting has always been important for different reasons throughout my practice. But in these paintings, I mean, I always want to expose the history of the process. And so sometimes the edges expose the first pores, and then in contrast to these kind of built up edges that I'm applying with a palette knife at the end of every session. So it's an accumulation or kind of a record of the process. So whatever's on my palette at the end of a session, I put it on the edge of the painting and I kind of build it up there. And it's a way of reinforcing the kind of objectness of the painting, but it's also, you know, a way of being resourceful. It's kind of a way of creating another kind of contrast within the painting. So it makes this kind of ethereal center of the painting much more deep because of the contrast between the physicality of the paint on the edges and the kind of translucency and transparency of the paint in the center of the painting. So it's all of those things. And I really, I mean, it started mostly as a record too, of really just a way to kind of mark time and, you know, and sort of mark time and actually also just be resourceful. And it's also another way of being playful too, and not kind of taking the painting too seriously.
That's really interesting. One of the things that strikes me very much about the difference between seeing your paintings in reproduction and then going to the gallery and seeing them in person is how in reproduction, what you call the ethereal qualities, I think are maximized. But then in person, there is actually a kind of emphatically material aspect to them. The edge being one version of that, but even in the center, even in the middle of this, what I keep calling the vapor, um, there is a kind of buildup of physical touches of paint. And this, to me, as a painter myself, yields this very rare condition for me in which it seems like all of the parts are sort of self-evident in terms of how they're made, each unit, but the aggregate is totally mysterious. Like, I don't know how you get to the final thing. Can you talk about the role of mystery versus, like, say, factuality or, a kind of self-evident aspect of the work? Can you talk about what those two things do in combination?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately my paintings are about paint and sort of also trying to kind of synthesize kind of an experience through paint and the materiality of paint. And so they're kind of not really photographable. When I say ethereal, it's just I guess in contrast, the appearance, like you were saying, the appearance of the center in relationship to the edge. But when you actually see my paintings in person, like you were saying, they're kind of crudely painted. I paint with really old brushes, cheap brushes, house painting brushes that are withered down. So they create this kind of effect. The hand sanding between every layer also does this thing that I can't, it's hard to explain, but it kind of holds the energy of the process in the paint because it's built up and then removed and then built up and then removed. And so this kind of excavating process adds to the kind of texture and the depth of the painting. So that's something I'm always playing with. And it's also an argument for paint in general is, I want the paintings to feel, I mean, we live in such a digital world and I want my paintings to feel very alive. And I think that, the medium of paint can achieve that. And so that's something I'm constantly trying to push. And in these smaller paintings, like this painting, for example, Facade Yellow, um, it, I'm trying to kind of create this density in the surface on a small scale and contrasted with this real physicality on the edges, especially on the bottom, to kind of create um, this sort of contrasting sensational experience, I guess. And I'm still thinking about the smaller ones in this show in particular, because I think I've pushed them in a way that is new, that I'm still sort of trying to understand in terms of the framing and the physicality and the kind of quantity of the physicality of the paint on the edges.
You've said, I think, a couple of times that in a way the paintings are about paint, and I find this to be a striking claim. It feels very natural to me, being somebody who is involved in that material all the time, but I think it's also a striking position to hold within the broader culture of art. And specifically, what I mean by that is that it's one of the central concerns in contemporary art is about understanding the context and the constructed nature of both works of art, mediums, but also artists themselves. And this seems to be a kind of analytical approach to art, which oftentimes very much points outward toward the society around it, whether that be the museum or the art world or Western civilization and so forth. But you speak very differently about your work, and I'm very interested in your role or what you think of in relationship to this kind of concern in contemporary art to always be noting the context and the constructed nature of things.
I mean, I think painting in general, like I know what you're trying to get at in terms of narrative, right? And like I think with my work, I feel like painting, for me, I have a real visceral experience, or can have a real visceral experience with paintings in particular. And I can feel sort of, they make me feel like sort of like, I mean, I'm a synesthete. Like I can feel the color and the sound of the color. I can feel a lot. And and I think for me, choosing the medium of paint was also a conceptual choice because I'm interested in sensation and experience. I think painting and sort of the malleability and the flexibility of paint and color and what it can do with surface can kind of like talk about those things in a very poetic way without having to actually say anything at all. Um, and I think yeah, I mean, I think it's just an argument for painting. Painting can do a lot with color and texture and viscosity that maybe words can't. And I think that's kind of the experience that I'm always trying to achieve with painting, but also the experience I'm trying to get with painting. Like I'm always moved by work that doesn't tell me how to think. And I feel kind of like I can have this kind of open-hearted experience with the work. And that's kind of the kind of thing that I want my paintings to do as well, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, you said you want the paintings to talk without saying, I think. And to me, that is very much at what I'm getting at. That sometimes it seems like a central concern of contemporary art is to how works of art are either undergirded or in a way unpackable with language, with spoken language and text. And these paintings seem to tempt the idea that there is something ineffable, there is something outside of language, and your word sensation seems to be very relevant here. And now to me, that seems like a very optimistic position. It's optimistic in relationship to like a cultural analysis that everything actually needs to be understood in literary terms, but it's also optimistic in relationship to something you brought up earlier, which is the ubiquity of digital culture. Um, do you think of yourself as an optimistic artist, or driven by hope, maybe more than critique? How would you look at yourself in terms of that?
I mean, I think I'm an optimistic person. And I think, I think I'm a empath. And I think I don't, I just think that, choosing the medium of paint is a real kind of intentional choice. And I think, and working with, I hate to even use the word abstraction because I think, everything is abstract, or representational. But um, I think in a culture, we're taking in so much information constantly and a lot, especially in this moment in particular, where there's so much pain and grief and we're intaking everything from every place in the world and we're just ingesting so much. I think painting is an opportunity for connection. So in that way, like, um, I guess I am an optimist, but I don't necessarily feel that like, I think when I think about sensation, it's like feeling everything. I want my paintings to actually um, evoke a spectrum of feeling. It's not just joy, but it's just holding multiple things, multiple emotions at once. And I think that's kind of the way that we live. That's just the human experience. And so that's something I'm trying to achieve with painting, I guess.
I feel like that last quality that you named, to me, comes across very much in the feeling of light and also color in the painting. And what I mean by that is that there is such a strong association between, polychromatic and also saturated color that is associated with like pleasure and joy and hedonism at the extreme. But there seem to be consistently kind of darker undertones in your painting, both literally dark, like a buildup toward a darkness of value, but then also a kind of dark emotional tenor sometimes. And through the light sometimes, like this painting itself, sometimes in your paintings it feels like the light is emerging from the back, but there's almost like something blocking it, or like a barrier or a thick veil that is separates me from the light, so I can glimpse it, particularly at the edges, or I feel like it's kind of emerging through the center, but then there is something kind of heavier and obstructing of the light. What How does that sound to you as a kind of experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I try to do in each painting. I mean, I think a lot about like transformation in a painting, and sort of like I was saying, holding these kind of opposites within a painting. And I paint indirectly also. So I'm always thinking a lot, meaning I'm always thinking about kind of layering color and how color can kind of um, seep through and kind of affect the other colors in a way. And I think the play between that and sort of whether there's a pattern that's being kind of that's emerging through the surface, or texture. I think that kind of the combination of all those things have different tone. They kind of evoke different tones or different sounds. And so I'm always trying to kind of play with those kinds of that kind of tension within a painting.
There are so many appeals to experience, very effective ones, I think. Um, and so I'm wondering if you feel like, and okay, and so this question is maybe a little bit of a doozy, but do you think there is such a thing as a universal substrate to experience, the possibility of there being something sort of not culturally specific about sensation or experience in front of a painting?
I Well, not culturally specific. Yeah, I do actually. I mean, I'm an energy worker. I like I have this deep meditation practice. I practice Vipassana, which deals with energy and focusing on sensations in your body. And it also means like seeing things as they really are, or insight. And I practice Reiki, which is like moving energy. And so I'm always trying. I mean, I understand that we bring ourselves to the work and our own experiences to every work. But I do believe there's this intrinsic kind of component to work. And I hope that um, my work captures a kind of energy that I'm putting into it. You know, a lot of, I used to never talk about this, years ago, but now I feel very comfortable. A lot of my work, I mean, there's a lot of work that I do before I get to the work, in terms of internal work and kind of being present and meditating and doing Reiki and all these things. I even sweep and kind of clean my studio so I can be really present with the work before I make it. And I think that all of that energy goes into the work, and I feel like somehow it's being evoked, or I hope it is. But also just through the process of sanding and building up, you know, the energy still exists in the painting. It's like you can't erase it out, or the paint exists in the painting. As much as I try to erase it, it's still there. It's kind of integral to the surface, and that to me is really interesting. It's like how experience life and like my own kind of practices, but also in terms of meditation and thinking about energy, but also how an object can also hold energy in that way. And so I hope that my paintings can evoke something more universal.
Yeah, I think it's always hard from the position of one's individual subjectivity to make a claim like that. But to me, and that's maybe also what I meant by being an optimistic or hopeful painter, is that there's implicitly a kind of proposition about viewership here, where isn't necessarily a defined inside or outside of the viewer group. You know, that it seems like these could export to so many different kinds of locations and cultural contexts and still be very experiential. And as much as academia sort of is tilted towards understanding the context of everything, I feel like a lot of artists have this hope that their work isn't necessarily bounded by any particular cultural condition. And it's really lovely to see somebody moving on that premise with the kind of intensity that you do. Maybe the last thing, or one of the last things I want to touch upon, is something that you brought up about how painting is almost like implicitly, it's a choice in relationship to the digital culture. And I remember like in the 90s, people talking about a kind of overwhelming schizophrenic experience of channel surfing on cable and take cable TV. And boy, no one had any idea about the ubiquity of imagery and the fragmentation of attention that was coming with the internet and social media and so forth. So maybe I just want to have a kind of open-ended question about like, um, in positioning painting in relationship to digital media, what are you wanting to establish there? What kind of distinction do you want to make between these kinds of pictures versus the kinds of pictures that are everywhere all the time now?
I mean, I think, I think my work is not, it's not made for the internet. You can't actually see it or experience it. It's actually, I want it to feel alive, and it's quiet. They're slow, and I mean, they emerge very slowly. And so they're kind of the opposite of how we experience the world or art on Instagram or online, or images online, or just the kind of fast-paced effect of that. And I think, yeah, I'm even always trying to push that even further. I remember seeing this Ad Reinhardt show, the blue paintings. I don't know if that's actually what he calls them, but it called them. But I saw them a few years ago in New York, and I had this experience. I mean, I cry in front of paintings a lot. Actually, there are a few. I mean, there are a few artists that I just can't help but cry in front of their work. Like, it just moves me so much. But this show in particular, I've always respected Ad Reinhardt in the way that, just all of the rules, just the kind of the impulse that he had. But the blue paintings in particular, I remember going there not really expecting to have this relationship to them, but they came alive in a way that I remember not even photographing them, because it would just kind of did the work a disservice. But there was like these after images, and just it was so experiential. I felt like very transported from that work. And it did something different than other works that I had seen of his prior, in person anyway. And it really made me think about like just this argument for experience, and like real experience, human connection with an artwork that makes you feel alive, that makes you feel something, like not. So I think there's just so much apathy in the world, and and just kind of experience everything through the internet. you lose that kind of connection to yourself and to others. And so I think painting can do that. And I want my paintings to, I want people to see them and experience them um, with their bodies, you know, and hopefully that, you know, it creates sort of a felt, they create a felt experience. That's what I really hope for. And I think painting does, really good painting can do that, you know, when, and so it is an argument for painting, I guess. I mean, in the materiality of paint.
Well, I want to take that as an opportunity to advocate for the viewing of these in person.
Indeed.
That one must go down and bother Philip in his personal space,
Yes.
get in front of these things, both to understand the scale in relationship to one's body, which is so important, and then to also experience the touch and really truly the richness and the resistance both of the surface and the color of these paintings are just so wonderful in person.
Thank you,
Well,
Daniel.
I want to thank you both for a very, very thoughtful conversation and a real profound one. I was very moved at different moments in this conversation and really enjoyed having the opportunity to see some doors open for me in terms of thinking about it. So, is there anything we haven't covered, Rema, that you might want to talk about? Or are we kind of good to go at this point?
I think we've covered everything. I hope that, yeah, I hope that everyone gets to see it if you're in LA. And thank
Yes,
you.
well,
Thank you,
I
Philip.
I
Thank you, Daniel.
certainly concur. It's just really a pleasure to have got a chance to have that conversation and with you both. Thank you both so much for sharing and giving us a lot to think about. Thanks also for coming out for the webinar today. I hope everyone's safe and your families are safe. It's a big time right now. I'm just going to say what everyone said, that if you have an opportunity to come to the gallery and see the show, I think you will be very pleased that you did. It's on view through November 2nd. And if you don't have a chance to see this show, perhaps because you're not in Los Angeles, there will be things for Rema coming up to either through an art fair or through exhibitions where hopefully you'll have a chance to see something really soon. It's a really wonderful show, and I just feel very privileged to have a chance to show it. And I'm so privileged to be able to work with you both within the context of the gallery portion. I really love that opportunity. So it's very meaningful for us both. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Philip.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Daniel.
weekend.
Thank you,
And
everyone.
thanks for joining me today. All right. Take care.